We're talking good is good, a statistical mindset,
Measures of central tendency.
normal distribution,
Standard deviation.
You'll pay for the whole seat, but you only need the edge.
All this and more after the break.
Welcome back, all you talented humans. We're talking good is good, it's a mindset. I'm Nick. That's Eric. We're the good guys.
And this is the Get Good Guide.
Being good is a blast.
It sure is.
Being good is a blast.
It sure is.
I always am unsure if we say anything to welcome people back from this part.
Well, it's the end of the
It's not,
theme
right?
song, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe you're welcome, right?
You're welcome.
Yeah, Riley has fired out that theme song for us. We appreciate it. And we're grooving, and you've got some funk horns in there. Get a little funk horn flair.
Yeah, they're courageous, if I had to put a word to it.
If I had
Courageous.
one word to describe the funk horns.
I think we will have to make a note, possibly to make an episode about our call and response with our talented specialist and his willingness to deal with our insane asks.
Absurd, I think, less than
insane. Interesting is how I will put it, right?
Yeah, it was a process. And but we're back, and we're in it, and we're loving it, and we're having a great time.
We are.
We're signaling to the editors.
Yeah. We're talking good is good, recognizing why being good is a blast, right? Beginning to recognize this.
Yeah, and this is early in the guide, right? Second unit.
Yep.
You've had a pretty honest and maybe even brutally honest time of self-reflection and preparation to head on to this journey. And before we get into that journey, we want to think not just about, okay, what is the story I've been telling myself like we were in the previous unit, but what am I trying to achieve here? Not in a hyper-specific sort of way, we'll do that in coming units, but really kind of sell out to this mindset, this idea of it's not about being great, that's a trap, it's about being good, and being good is where joy happens, it's where capacity happens, it's where efficiency lives.
Sure.
And there's some really compelling stuff. I mean, the opening, it's a bit of a bit, it's a bit of a joke, but these are like provable mathematical realities.
Well, and that's the interesting piece, and we talk about this often, right, about how mathematical this is, right? How true this is mathematically, and how provable, and how difficult it is for us to believe that this is true as human beings in general, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's cultural factors there for sure. And I think I'd be interested to know if you took this concept to like a 6-year-old,
sure,
who maybe has spent less time being told certain, who has been offered less conventional wisdom.
Yeah, they have less human experience under their belt, right?
And I think it would be kind of an intuitive thing, right? The entire unit begins with an analysis of a normal distribution.
Sure.
Some people refer to it as a bell curve. And if you haven't seen one, that's wild to me that you've not seen one. But it would be possible, right? But it's a bell shape,
right?
And with the y-axis sort of signifying the amount of a population,
sure,
and the x-axis signifying the sort of distribution of that population. Right. So typically left is like less or less skilled, and right is more or more skilled.
Sure.
And so if you take something simple like heights of humans, right, and then you put the shortest possible sort of adult human on the left, and they might even be, a little person. They might be experiencing dwarfism. Sure. And you take the tallest person and put them on the right. Again, might be experiencing giantism, giantism or pituitary overload, etc. Or they're just extraordinarily tall.
Sure,
right,
possible, right? Very, very possible.
7'6" or something.
Yeah, I actually have a personal friend whose both of his parents are north of 6'4", and he's north of 7, right? And just a big guy.
Yeah, and that's going to put him so far to the right as to be what a term that will get bandied about is outlier. Sure. It is a misused term, right? An outlier is someone who theoretically exists outside the normal distribution, right?
Yep.
And for human height, 7'1" is not outside. It's not an outlier. It's not outside.
It exists.
It exists.
It exists.
Now, 8'11" could be said to be an outlier because there's only one person known. They existed.
Sure.
They're known to have existed. but they exist outside of any current extant distribution. The center portion of a normal distribution will account for about 68 to 70% of your population.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So the sort of within the standard deviation.
Like one standard deviation on either side.
Correct, right. On either side of that center average. And I know we used it, the measures of central tendency, right? So mean, median, mode. The average will give you that central point. The median will be the same as the average in a normal distribution. And so what's really interesting about that normal distribution is what happens when you say, what is good?
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
How do we define the term good statistically?
Yeah, especially, exactly right. And it'll be interesting to discover a little bit how we define it, maybe versus how people, without hearing this, might say, oh, I think good is this. Right. And I think there will be a disconnect from time to time. And that's partially what we're trying to, with this unit, trying to bring light to about where that amount of population really lives.
And we keep using the term population because that's kind of that's a statistical analytical term. Could be a sample set as well, right? So when we talk population, we could be talking about literal population of people. Could be a sample set. So if you say there's X number of pieces of artwork in the world, and if I put them on a bell curve and then had people sort of analyze what they felt was good or great or whatever, you would see this distribution, and and it's wild. The first time you encounter this, it feels wrong.
Sure.
And I will only speak for myself. The thing that felt the most wrong about it was how quickly you surpassed 80% of the population.
Right.
Or the sample set.
It seems like it should take more work than it does and take longer, and you should have to be better than you are to do it, right?
You know, and to give it simplest possible terms, being better than 80% of the population means that if there are 5 people in a room, you're probably the best. Right. If you're 10 people in a room, you're probably top 2. That gets kind of zany, right? If you start to think of it in another term, let's say you're part of a large organization.
Sure.
So you work for a company, which I think in the United States, the definition of a small business is anyone with 50 employers or fewer.
I think that's pretty close, right?
And so you're talking about in that population, you'd be in the top 10 performers in a small business.
Sure.
And that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've used the term a couple times, standard deviation.
Sure.
How does that kind of fit into this normal distribution in the bell curve?
Well, I think as far as this idea is concerned, with being good, right? We talk about it being 2 standard deviations from the mean, right? Is past good, is great, essentially we've decided.
Yeah, 2 to 3.
Yeah,
right?
2 to 3.
3 is where you get into that 1%.
Yeah, correct. So we're talking about only one deviation from the mean. That's it, right? That's it. And being able to sit there in that realm is so much easier than we expect. And getting used to finding yourself these, being able to view these population sets, as we call them often, is helpful in placing yourself or where that should be even. And
when we think of these deviations, they are linear, right?
Sure.
Left and right on the x-axis.
Sure.
And as far as audio medium, this is kind of a weird thing to try to do in audio.
To describe,
but if you're looking at the guide, there's a really clean illustration of this. That linear nature of that is that meaning, in other words, the same amount of effort or the same amount of time or the same amount of difference in skill or difference in quality.
Sure.
You know, it's the same amount to go from a 0 standard deviation to 1 standard deviation as it is to go from 1 to 2.
Right.
But the gain is dramatically reduced.
Sure.
Right. When you go right, when you're at 1 standard deviation to the right of average, you are now better than 80% of the population.
Right.
If you put that same effort again, right, you're talking now about being better than roughly 94-ish, maybe 93-ish% of the population.
Sure.
We go back to simplest terms. We say, okay, there's 10 people in a room. If I am 1 standard deviation better than average, I'm in the top 2.
Right.
I then have to do twice as much work to be the best.
Yeah, to be 1 person better than I am now.
Right, to be, And so I was better than 8 people. Now I'm better than 9 people.
Right.
That's not a dramatic change, but I had to double up how much work and effort it took.
Absolutely. And realistically, at least double up.
Yeah.
Right. At least double up.
Yeah. And Pareto's principle, which is, we've talked about briefly, but we dig into it in later episodes. I should say later units.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's an inefficiency.
Well, yeah, and time is the big factor, right? And that's what, we don't really see on our standard deviation graph, if you will, right? The account for time is not exactly clear, but we know that's the most finite resource, right? The only one that everybody gets the same amount of, and it's gonna take a lot more time, right, to surpass that next one person or two people or whatever. And that's just not really worth it most of the time. No. Right?
Well, and you're solidly in the valley of despair at that point. You're solidly in the greatness trap. All right, we'll probably dig in a little bit more here on maybe some personal examples over on the Patreon. But that's going to do it for the main feed. The primary thrust obviously is to understand the statistical realities of what we're talking about when we say good is good, right? Good is good. It's not average, or even, as I've heard people say, like, oh, well, you're only good. You must be sort of below average.
Sure.
It's like, no, well, by definition.
Well, and we run into this all the time. You see this a lot in schooling with letter grades, right? Of like C feeling like failing when C should be,
Well, and that's a direct result of grade inflation.
Oh, for sure.
I'm sure we'll
rave
about that. That one affects us professionally.
But it's right. People have a very skewed view of what the standard deviation is in a really very real life situation. Yes. Right? We all have this kind of preconceived notion about what the standard deviation looks like, even if we feel like we know what it is. Right?
Well, friends, thank you again. Appreciate you for taking the time. And we will see you in the outro. Well, thank you so much, friends in the Get Good gang. If you want to head on over to the website, you can find it at getgood.guide, where you can download the guide itself. And if you're so inclined or want a little bit more, we would encourage you to check out the Patreon, patreon.com/getgoodguide, and find yourself a little bit of that sweet, sweet Get Good gold. If you want a little bit for free, why don't you stick around after these ads and get a little nugget. As always, I'm Eric, that's Nick. We're the Get Good guys.
And this is the Get Good Guide.
On you.
Statistical.
Slow it down and just staccato it. Staccato.
Legato.
Hang on.